In the picturesque town of Oak Ridge, nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York, the Callahan family was the epitome of success and unity. Michael Callahan, a 42-year-old software engineer, had built a life that many envied. A thriving career, a beautiful home, and what appeared to be a loving family. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect facade lurked a web of betrayal that would ultimately lead to a shocking and tragic conclusion. Michael had always been close to his younger brother David, and maintained a strong relationship with his father, James Callahan Sr. The family was known for their frequent gatherings and lavish vacations. Michael's wife, Rebecca, a 38-year-old interior designer, was adored by the Callahan clan and seemed to fit seamlessly into the family dynamic. From the outside, the Callahans appeared to be the quintessential American family. Michael, with his salt-and-pepper hair and kind eyes, was respected in the community for his work ethic and dedication to his family. Rebecca, with her radiant smile and effortless charm, was the perfect complement to Michael's more reserved nature. David, younger by 3 years, was the family's golden boy. Charismatic, successful in his own right as a real estate mogul, and always ready with a joke or a helping hand. James Sr., a widower and retired judge, was the proud patriarch who had instilled in his sons the values of hard work and family loyalty. For years, the Callahans enjoyed idyllic family trips, skiing in Aspen, lounging on the beaches of the Maldives, and exploring the cultural riches of Europe. These vacations were a time for bonding, laughter, and creating cherished memories, or so Michael thought. Neighbors often commented on how close-knit the Callahan family seemed. Sarah Thompson, who lived next door to Michael and Rebecca, would later tell investigators, "They were always together, always smiling. You could hear laughter coming from their backyard during their weekend barbecues. I never suspected." Well, who could have? The truth began to unravel on a crisp autumn evening in 2022. Michael, having forgotten some important documents at home, returned to his house unexpectedly. As he approached the front door, he heard muffled laughter and conversation coming from the living room. Recognizing the voices of Rebecca, his wife, David, his brother, and his father, Michael initially smiled, pleased to hear his family spending time together in his absence. But as he quietly entered the house, the scene that greeted him shattered his world in an instant. From the hallway, Michael noticed the living room lights were dimmed, and there was something off about the laughter, intimate and far too familiar. Curious and slightly uneasy, he walked closer, his footsteps careful and silent. He peeked into the room, expecting to see them perhaps sharing drinks or laughing at a family story. Instead, what he saw knocked the air from his lungs. There, in front of him, was Rebecca, his wife, kneeling on the carpet. Her hands rested on his brother James's thighs as she looked up at him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. His father stood behind her, his hands gripping her waist possessively. Michael froze, his mind struggling to process the sickening sight before him. Rebecca moaned softly, her voice drenched in lust. "Oh yes, James, don't stop. This part of my body belongs only to you." Her words cut through the silence of the house like a blade. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, his ears ringing with disbelief. His father shifted slightly, his face obscured but his intentions painfully clear from his movements. The betrayal wasn't just sexual, it was a violation of trust at its deepest level. Michael's father, the man who had raised him, was participating in an act of ultimate treachery with the two people Michael had loved the most. The details of the scene burned themselves into Michael's mind. The way his father's hands roamed Rebecca's body with familiarity, the glazed look in James's eyes as he reveled in his dominance, and the way Rebecca responded with fervor as if nothing else mattered. Frozen in shock, Michael retreated silently, unnoticed by the trio engrossed in their illicit encounter. He drove aimlessly for hours, his mind reeling as he pieced together the signs he had overlooked. The lingering touches, the private jokes, the eager anticipation for family gatherings, it all took on a sinister new meaning. Over the next few weeks, Michael's behavior changed subtly. He became withdrawn at work, citing stress from a challenging project. To Rebecca, David, and his father, he presented a facade of normalcy, all while meticulously planning his next move. Michael's background in technology proved to be a chilling advantage. He discreetly installed hidden cameras throughout the house and hacked into the phones of his wife, brother, and father. The evidence he gathered was damning. Explicit messages, secret rendezvous, and videos that confirmed his worst fears. The betrayal ran deep, with roots stretching back several years. As Michael delved deeper into their deception, he uncovered a pattern. The trio had been using family vacations as a cover for their affair, stealing intimate moments while he was occupied with work calls or activities. The realization that his most cherished memories were tainted by their betrayal fueled Michael's growing rage. One particularly disturbing discovery was a series of emails between Rebecca and David discussing their plans for the future. "Once we figure out how to tell Michael," David had written, "we can finally be together openly. Dad's on board with everything." The casual way they discussed destroying his life sent Michael into a spiral of despair and anger. As he sifted through the mountain of evidence, Michael stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. There were mentions of his mother, Eleanor, and some of the exchanges between Rebecca and David. It seemed that Eleanor, who had always been a bit distant, was aware of the affair. Whether she approved or was simply turning a blind eye, Michael couldn't tell, but the revelation added another layer of betrayal to his already shattered world. As the weeks passed, Michael struggled to maintain his composure. He threw himself into his work, staying late at the office and avoiding family dinners. Rebecca, David, and James Sr. seemed to barely notice, caught up in their own world of secrets and lies. The turning point came when Michael overheard a phone conversation between Rebecca and David. They were planning another family vacation, this time to a remote cabin in the Adirondacks. As Michael listened, he heard them laughing about how they would find ways to sneak off together while he was distracted. "We'll tell Michael it's a big family reunion," Rebecca giggled. "Your wife and kids will be there. Your mom, too. He'll be so busy playing the perfect uncle and son, he won't even notice us slipping away." David's response made Michael's stomach churn. "Perfect. Dad's already on board. He says he'll keep Eleanor occupied. It's almost too easy." Something inside Michael snapped. He realized that he couldn't bear to watch this charade continue any longer. With a cold, calculated determination, he began to formulate a plan. Michael's plan was meticulous, born from a combination of his technical expertise and the raw emotion of betrayal. He spent weeks preparing, all while maintaining a facade of normalcy to his unsuspecting family. First, he purchased a handgun through a series of untraceable transactions, using skills he had learned from a cybersecurity course he had taken years ago. He was waiting for the right moment to put his plan into action when an unexpected opportunity presented itself. One evening during a family dinner, David cleared his throat and said, "Hey, I've been thinking, you know that trip to the Adirondacks we've been planning? Why don't we make it a real family reunion? We could invite Mom and I could bring Sarah and the kids. It would be nice to have everyone together." Michael felt a surge of dark excitement course through him. This was perfect. Better than anything he could have orchestrated himself. He carefully schooled his features into a mask of enthusiasm. "That's a great idea, David," Michael replied, his voice betraying none of the turmoil beneath the surface. "It would be nice to have the whole family together. What do you think, Dad? Rebecca?" Rebecca and James Sr. exchanged a quick glance before enthusiastically agreeing. Michael pretended not to notice the silent communication between them, but inwardly, his resolve hardened. They thought they were so clever, planning their secret rendezvous under the guise of a family gathering. Little did they know they were walking right into his trap. In the weeks leading up to the trip, Michael made several secret trips to the cabin, preparing it for what he had planned. He installed hidden cameras, ensuring he would have evidence of their betrayal. He also made subtle modifications to the cabin's layout, ensuring he would have the upper hand when the time came. All the while, Michael continued to gather evidence. He recorded phone calls, saved text messages, and compiled a detailed dossier of the affair. Part of him hoped that he would find something to exonerate them, some explanation that would make sense of the nightmare he was living. But each new piece of evidence only confirmed the depth of their betrayal. The next morning, as they all piled into their cars for the drive to the Adirondacks, Michael played the role of the excited family man to perfection. He joked with David's kids, helped his mother with her bags, and even managed to smile at Rebecca as she climbed into the passenger seat beside him. As they drove towards the cabin, Michael's mind was eerily calm. He had made his decision. This would be their last family trip. By the time it was over, he would have his revenge, and the true nature of the Callahan family would be exposed to the world. Little did the others know that as they looked forward to a week of relaxation and for some illicit rendezvous, Michael was counting down the hours to a confrontation that would shatter their world forever. The remote cabin in the Adirondacks, once a place of family memories, was about to become the stage for a tragedy that would reverberate far beyond the peaceful mountains that surrounded it. On Thanksgiving Day, 2022, Michael put his plan into motion. The family arrived at the lakeside cabin late in the afternoon. Michael played the role of the perfect host, serving drinks and engaging in lighthearted conversation. He made a show of taking a sleeping pill before retiring early, giving the impression that he would be out cold for the night. In reality, Michael lay awake, waiting. Around midnight, he heard the telltale sounds of movement in the hallway. Silently, he reached for the gun he had hidden beneath his pillow. Michael crept downstairs, following the sounds of hushed voices and muffled laughter coming from the den. He paused outside the door, his hand trembling on the doorknob. In that moment, a lifetime of memories flashed through his mind. Childhood adventures with David, fishing trips with his father, his wedding day with Rebecca. All of it now tainted, corrupted by their betrayal. With a deep breath, Michael pushed open the door. Michael opened the door and stood in stunned silence at the horrific scene in front of him. His wife, Rebecca, was on her hands and knees while both his father, James, and his brother, David, were behind her, simultaneously having his wife. The sight was sickening. Rage consumed Michael in an instant. Without a word, he stepped into the room and raised the gun he had brought with him. In a blind fury, he shot David first, the bullet hitting him squarely in the chest. James barely had time to react before Michael pulled the trigger again, hitting him in the stomach. Both men collapsed to the floor, blood pooling beneath them. Rebecca, startled and frozen in fear, scrambled away from their bodies. Michael, breathing heavily, turned to her, the gun still in his hand, eyes filled with a cold fury. "Why?" he demanded, his voice low and shaking. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching sirens echoed in the distance. The police arrived, alerted by a neighbor, and Michael was taken into custody without resistance. As they led him away in handcuffs, he screamed at Rebecca, "You'll suffer the same fate!" The arrest of Michael Callahan sent shockwaves through the community of Oak Ridge. The sordid details of the case captivated the nation, becoming fodder for true crime podcasts and late-night television specials. In the days following the shooting, the quiet town of Oak Ridge was transformed into a media circus. Reporters camped out in front of the Callahan home, hoping to catch a glimpse of Rebecca or get a statement from a family friend. The local diner, once a place for quiet conversations over coffee, now buzzed with theories and whispered gossip about the Callahan family's secret life. As the investigation unfolded, more details emerged that painted a complex picture of the Callahan family dynamics. Investigators discovered journals belonging to Rebecca, which detailed the progression of the affair and her conflicted feelings about the situation. One entry, dated 3 years prior, read, "I never meant for any of this to happen. It started so innocently with David, just a moment of weakness on a family trip. But then James found out, and instead of being angry, he joined in. I know it's wrong, but I feel more alive than I have in years. How can I give this up?" The trial of Michael Callahan became one of the most high-profile cases in the state's history. The courthouse was packed every day, with lines forming before dawn as curious onlookers vied for a seat in the gallery. Michael's defense team, led by the charismatic attorney Samantha Reeves, painted a picture of a man driven to the brink by an unthinkable betrayal. They presented evidence of the long-standing affair, arguing that Michael had acted in a state of extreme emotional distress. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Reeves said in her opening statement, "this is not a case about murder. This is a case about a man whose entire world was shattered in an instant, a man who discovered that the three people he loved and trusted most in this world had been lying to him, betraying him for years. Can any of us truly say how we would react in such a situation?" The prosecution, led by the ambitious District Attorney Irma Owens, portrayed Michael as a calculating killer who had meticulously planned the murders. They emphasized the premeditation involved, from the installation of hidden cameras to the orchestration of the cabin trip. "The evidence will show," Owens countered, "that Mr. Callahan didn't just stumble upon this affair and react in the heat of the moment. He discovered it, obsessed over it, planned his revenge, and executed that plan with cold precision. This was not a crime of passion, but a carefully orchestrated act of vengeance." As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand, each adding a new layer to the complex narrative of the Callahan family tragedy. Tom Reeves, Michael's colleague, testified about the changes he had noticed in Michael's behavior in the weeks leading up to the shooting. "He seemed haunted," Tom said, "like he was carrying this enormous weight that he couldn't share with anyone." Sarah Thompson, the Callahan's neighbor, spoke about the family's seemingly perfect facade. "They were the last people you'd expect something like this to happen to," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "It just goes to show, you never really know what's going on behind closed doors." Perhaps the most dramatic moment of the trial came during the testimony of Dr. Evelyn Murray, a forensic psychologist who had evaluated Michael. Dr. Murray diagnosed Michael with acute stress disorder, bordering on PTSD as a result of the traumatic discovery of the affair. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Murray stated, "Mr. Callahan experienced a severe dissociative episode at the time of the killings. The prolonged stress of maintaining a facade while privately grappling with this betrayal, combined with the shock of witnessing the affair firsthand, effectively shattered his sense of reality." Rebecca's testimony was the linchpin of the trial. Torn between self-preservation and guilt, she provided a damning account of the affair while attempting to distance herself from the worst of the accusations. As Rebecca took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She looked a shadow of her former self, her once vibrant appearance now haggard and drawn. Her hands shook as she was sworn in. "Mrs. Callahan," Irma Owens began, "can you tell the court about the nature of your relationship with David Callahan and James Callahan Sr.?" Rebecca's voice trembled as she spoke. It started about 5 years ago. David and we grew close during a family vacation. One night, after too many drinks, we crossed a line. I felt terrible, but I couldn't seem to stop myself from seeing him again. "And James Callahan Sr.? How did he become involved?" Owens pressed. Rebecca closed her eyes as if the memory pained her. "James discovered us about a year into the affair, but instead of exposing us, he wanted to join. It was like once we had broken that taboo, nothing else mattered." As Rebecca continued her testimony, she revealed the intricate web of lies and secret meetups that had characterized the last few years of their lives. She spoke of the guilt she felt, the times she had considered confessing to Michael, and the twisted logic they had used to justify their actions. "We told ourselves that Michael would never understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that he was too wrapped up in his work to notice us anyway. We convinced ourselves that we weren't really hurting him if he didn't know." During cross-examination, Samantha Reeves sought to emphasize the impact of the betrayal on Michael. "Mrs. Callahan," Reeves began, her tone sharp, "did you ever consider how your actions would affect Michael if he found out?" Rebecca flinched at the question. I tried not to think about it. We all did. It was easier to pretend that it would never happen. And when he did find out, when he walked in on you that night at the cabin, what was your first thought?" Rebecca's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she answered, "I thought my world was ending. I saw the look in his eyes, and I knew we had destroyed him." After a grueling 3-week trial, the jury retreated to deliberate. The town of Oak Ridge held its breath, divided in its sympathies. Some saw Michael as a victim pushed too far, while others condemned him as a cold-blooded killer. The jury deliberated for 4 days, a testament to the complexity of the case. When they finally returned, the courtroom was packed to capacity, with reporters poised to break the news to the waiting world. The jury foreman, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression, stood to deliver the verdict. "On the charge of first-degree murder of David Callahan, we find the defendant, Michael Callahan, not guilty." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Michael remained stoic, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance. "On the charge of first-degree murder of James Callahan Sr., we find the defendant, Michael Callahan, not guilty." Another murmur swept through the audience. Rebecca, sitting in the gallery, buried her face in her hands. The foreman continued, "On the charge of second-degree murder of David Callahan, we find the defendant, Michael Callahan, guilty." Michael closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging slightly. "On the charge of second-degree murder of James Callahan Sr., we find the defendant, Michael Callahan, guilty." The courtroom erupted in a cacophony of reactions. Cries of outrage mingled with sighs of relief. The judge called for order, his gavel striking sharply against the sound block. Michael Callahan stood motionless, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. The verdict seemed to confirm what he had known deep down, that his actions, while born of unimaginable pain, had crossed a line from which there was no return. Judge Malcolm Stevens, a veteran of the bench known for his even-handed approach, addressed the court. "This case has been one of the most challenging of my career," he began, his voice grave. "It has forced us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature and to question the very foundations of trust and family." The judge, taking into account the extraordinary circumstances of the case, sentenced Michael to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. As Michael was led away from the courtroom, his eyes met Rebecca's one last time. In that moment, volumes were spoken without a word, of love corrupted, trust shattered, and lives irrevocably changed. The Callahan case left an indelible mark on Oak Ridge and beyond. It sparked conversations about the nature of betrayal, the limits of human endurance, and the fine line between justice and revenge. Long after the media frenzy died down and the appeals were exhausted, the tragedy of the Callahan family served as a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers lurk not in the unknown but in the hearts of those we hold most dear.